And we're just going to go straight into the conversation. I've got Heather here from the Awfully Hilarious project. I've just met Heather. I'm going to go straight into this interview. She's going to tell me about her journey, where she's at, her thoughts on PMDD, what she's working on, all of the juicy stuff. I know that when I've talked about PMDD in the past, it's really resonated with so many of you, and it's such a juicy topic. So, hi, Heather, over to you.
Anna, great to be here and so good to be here with all your listeners. And I was just saying before we began to record, I'm not surprised that PMDD has been such a juicy topic. It's been shrouded in mystery and shame and stigma for so many years that my own personal experience with it took 30 years from onset of symptoms to diagnosis. That's not okay. This is why we're talking about this. In my day job, I'm working hard on this every day. I work as a clinical counselor and nature-based therapist in Whistler, British Columbia, Canada. And then the advocacy arm of my work is the Awfully Hilarious Project, where we'll get more into this and share some of the hilarious stories. But joyful accident is really how this all happened. I went on a terrible date a number of years ago wherein the man arrived actually wearing a parachute. And there's so much I could say about that as a therapist around attachment styles and avoidant attachment, but literal parachute to the first date. And afterwards, I was so upset to be so dismissed and have my time used in such a way and to feel used in such a way that I called up a dear friend who said, "Oh, just wait till you hear about the date I had. You are so not alone. We could write a book." And bing, bang, boom, we did. And it took off. It became a bestseller on Amazon. And I realized that's a way to get a story out there in the world. And we had initially just planned to staple these stories together and put them out in little free libraries to say, if you're having dating disasters, you are not alone. If you're feeling disillusioned, you are not alone. And we were going to sign it, the Tinderellas. But as we were gathering the stories, we ended up getting a lot of stories submitted around not just dating, but women's health issues that hadn't been addressed. Like a dear friend of mine wrote a story called A Sock in a Dark Place about walking down the street shortly after having one of her children and feeling that maybe one of her socks had gotten caught in her pants in the laundry because she felt it like falling down her leg. And only later to realize it was a bladder prolapse that had gone untreated for 6 months because women's health has been that way, sort of in the basements and the back corners, and then we've been left kind of to treat ourselves. All circling back to that book about dating disasters. It's called Awfully Hilarious: Stories We Never Tell. When it did so well, we realized this is a way to help tell the stories that need to be told, to get the stories that we need into the right hands. So out came then Awfully Hilarious period pieces. We put out a call for menstruation stories. We were inundated with amazing, amazing stories, some very sad, some very poignant, some very playful, and some very awfully hilarious. But half of the people who submitted have PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And because it's such a dangerous, undiagnosed condition, we need to talk about it more. I myself spent 30 years desperately seeking support, even though I'm the daughter of a doctor and hold various layers of privilege. So I think that's where the desire is. This has not been spoken of nearly enough. The symptoms are very dramatic. It can lead to a lot of desperation. And I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to speak with all of you about it more here today.
I've just had a lot of wows as you were talking because there's a lot going on. Like, wow, that's amazing. What I love actually is that you've had these thoughts and you've taken action. So it's like, I could write a book, so I'm going to write a book, and we're going to have these conversations. And I, what as well, you're saying, your mom was a doctor, and yet, we're still in the dark about so many things, and it just shows. Well, we were saying, weren't we, before I came on, like, love hate with social media. There is a lot of negatives, but certainly one of the positives is that we can have these conversations, we can have them, and then send them out to across the world, and we can get that message out there. But 30 years ago, I'm probably about the same. So I'm 44 now. So yeah, I was probably like PMDD since very early teens. There was not that information,
No,
and even if there was, you would not be having these conversations, would you?
no, it was like, now I'm wearing this shirt because it's edgy for me too, but to get playfully provocative around talking about the things we haven't talked about because people are literally dying just because we haven't spoken about these things. And I mean, we spoke about this in the intro too, much more about this, but that women's health has been really on the back burner for far too long. So there's the research gap. There's a lot going on in terms of why women haven't received the support that others have. Menstruating bodies just haven't been studied nearly to the degree that male bodies have.
For people that are just listening to this and not seeing the video, so Heather has got this really cool t-shirt and it says ovary acting. Yeah? Like it. Merch is available. So,
I decided I'm gonna own it.
I tell you what I'm loving, Heather, is the fact that I was drawn to you with the title awfully hilarious, and then the fact that we're talking about such a serious topic, as you say.
Mhm.
But if you've got to take the lighter side on it, you've got to put a spin on it, you've got to see, put a bit of humor on it. And I think by doing that, again, it makes it much more relatable. And
Yeah.
yeah, and people are much more likely to have the conversations.
It is. And there's more to it than that also. Like I really appreciate you honoring that. And if I feel like the name sort of came to me just in a dream. It didn't feel like it came from me. It came to me as a gift. But that idea is these are poignant, painful stories. These are for some people very, very traumatic events, but they're not being presented in that raw form that people have worked through and processed and written and created a story that is to be helpful to others. And through my therapeutic lens, that's what we would call sort of pendulation or titration. We're working with something really hard, but we're bringing in the resources and support of community and humor and connection to process something in a new way. We're not just dumping the very painful thing on the reader to have them then have to do the work with. We're doing the work, and humor is a really, really healthy tool to kind of interrupt and help the nervous system manage and carry a lot more than we could otherwise, if that makes sense. So it's very deliberate and the awfully hilarious. Sometimes we've gotten feedback like, hey, some of these stories aren't that funny, and some of them are really, really hard, and that actually is a big piece of it. Is it's awful often before it's hilarious. And life can be a bit like that. Like a lot of things we find really funny, and I love working with comedians. Like I just got to see Chelsea Handler this week. What an honor. So cool. But a lot of the time they're working on that very taboo edge of what is not okay to talk about. And there's a discomfort there, relieved through laughter. If anyone has watched Nanette, Hannah Gadsby, amazing. She does such a good job of speaking about, sorry, I'm just pausing because I'm not sure if her pronouns are she or they, but the Netflix documentary is an amazing, amazing exploration of how humor can help us really speak to the edges of like kind of what's not allowed in our society. Because if we don't talk about what's not allowed, really, really hard things can happen. Really bad things can happen. As you and I know, Anna, we have lived experience with what it means to be suffering with something very dangerous and to not have support. And you're right. My father is a doctor, actually. My mother's also a healthcare practitioner. Many healthcare practitioners in my family. I work in healthcare, and we didn't know because periods were ignored and hush hush and stigmatized.
Actually, reading another book at the minute by Kate Northrup about
Oh yeah.
doing less, and it talks about
Oh
cyclical living. And
yes,
I'm
on my bookshelf.
yeah, and I'm reading it thinking, duh. And I know
Yeah.
her mum actually wrote the generation that wrote again about women's mental health and periods and labor and all this, and she didn't obviously take any of it in. And I'm reading it going, oh yeah, like I only would make a note of my period just so I would know to buy tampons for no other reason. And now I'm like going, like how how daft is that? And then suddenly it's been like this light bulb. And what I found like throughout my journey is people go, it's knowledge. And while having the knowledge might not make things better overnight, it suddenly gives you that power back, and you just feel
Yes.
actually it gives you hope. And I was
Yes.
just saying to you as well, I was like, so I'm managing and controlling my PMDD now. I would say like I'm 90% there and have been for quite a number of years. However, I had have like a real a very busy time with my life like the past few weeks, and a lot going on. And I have literally had like, I think my estrogen's gone through the roof, and I've had like all the symptoms have gone boom, like I'm going to stop you. And if that had happened to me, you know, like a few years ago, that would have floored me for months. I would have gone, that's it, it's all over, I can't carry on. Whereas I've gone, this is a bit shit, but I know what it is. And I know what's happened here. And I need to talk that voice down and I need to control it. And I need to give myself a bit of grace here because it's happening for a reason.
Hmm.
So I think, yeah, for me, it's like knowledge, and knowledge can be shared through this. Knowledge is empowering. Knowledge is part of the healing.
Hmm. Hmm. And it's interesting because again, through the therapeutic lens, and it's interesting because I'm sorry to hear you're suffering, but as we spoke about, it's different now. Because you know what it is, you know what to do. And that's something we talk about a lot is like information can create safety. If we don't know, we're just in a space of uncertainty. In my past life, I worked as a flight attendant, and there's a reason if you're delayed. Oh, well, in a highly unlikely event there's a change in our cabin pressure, we are prepared to deal with what may arise. But what's so cool about that is that you would know this then, of course, in the airline industry, when things go wrong, the whole industry rises and learns together to keep everyone safer. But one of those things is if there's a mechanical or if there's information, you share that with the passengers because people need to know. And that's where we create calm and safety. And with PMDD, it's been shrouded in mystery. There's little information. I'm so with you there to just, as we learn more, we can gain a greater sense of comfort, safety, agency. It's good for our nervous system to know. Not knowing is one of the hardest states to be in as a human being.
I was going to say, and I've spoken about this in previous episodes, isn't cabin crew one of the worst jobs when you're having a PMDD help?
Oh, oh, the worst. I mean, anyone out there had their period on an airplane? I had it recently, and like, look, I'm an advocate for menstrual health and awareness, and I got my period unexpectedly in the air. Obviously, I'm in the lavatory, the tiny lavatory, which has that distinct smell. And I mean, people like to talk about sex in an airplane lab. Don't go there. There's far better places to do that. In any case, tiny little space, smells bad. There's toilet paper. There's no, and it's like the thinnest toilet paper, right? And I'm bleeding through my pants on a plane. I'm like, how do I get back to, 7 Bravo in this scenario? And I just had the thought, I felt really angry, and I had the thought that like if men got their periods, absolutely there would be tampons and pads on an airplane. There is no doubt. Like there's just no doubt in my mind. But I realized for the first 45 years of my life I put up with that, just thinking, "Oh yeah, of course I have to carry my own thing hidden up my sleeve." And now I thought, "Why the fuck would I carry a tampon hidden up my sleeve when a bathroom, if it doesn't have toilet paper, then you would come out and say, "Oh, by the way, please restock the toilet paper in the front lav."
And we know what
And it's,
we know what we
you
do with
know,
toilet paper, don't we? So
I know. Anyway, I thought it was just so funny that it hadn't even occurred to me before that menstruating people deserve that. And I love projects like Period Pin, and I think the M Project. I can't remember the names of all of them, but where they're trying to ensure that menstrual products are available to people free. So many people I was reading are having to choose between food or menstrual products. This is not okay.
like in the UK, until really recently, we had the luxury VAT tax on tampons, not on sanitary towels,
No.
but on tampons. They were considered like the luxury. So there was like VAT on top of that. So yeah, difficult
Wow.
belief. I was thinking
I
about
mean, I suppose it is a luxury not to bleed through your pants, and we call that privilege, and that would be being a man in that patriarchal society. I don't
absolutely.
want to sound like a total jerk about all this, but there is that.
It's like it's just like there's been so one of the projects, wasn't it? It's like period poverty, and it's like
Mhm.
people like so with refugees, and it's like going. You imagine you've lost everything, your entire world, and then you get your period, and I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, that is really shit, and that is really real, and I can't believe
Yeah.
this isn't talked about more. I was actually pleasantly surprised. I went to my daughter's sixth form college, so she's nearly 17, and so it's like young adults, and it's very modern college, and I used their bathrooms. I was like, wow, like it was like a buffet of sanitary products and
Wow.
moisturizers and everything. I was like, wow, and they had like all the different types of absorbency. I was like, and
That's amazing.
I was like,
And like I love that so much, and that your 17-year-old daughter is having a different experience than you and I would have. The first story in this book, actually, I love so much. It's a poem by an 11-year-old named Yale Letchford, and it's just so beautiful. And it's really what this project is about. She says, it's just one page, but she says, "I want my period, God damn it." And if that's the world that Anna, you and I can create by having these conversations, and those of us in our age category where the periods and menstruation have been so shamed and stigmatized, such that next generations coming forward look forward to this really threshold experience and are supported through it and are held through it and can speak openly about it and can get what they need in bathrooms anywhere. Like, yeah, the buffet should be there for everyone everywhere. I'm so excited that's happening at your daughter's school. And how exciting and thrilling for us, but also that it shouldn't be exciting and thrilling, right? It should just be, of course. And if the buffet were low, we'd just say, "Oh, hey, we're low on super flow high absorbency in the bathroom right now," you know?
Absolutely.
And someone would say, "Oh, so sorry, please don't report us. We're on it."
Yeah, and as well, it was a unisex bathroom, which I was like,
Yes.
oh, I'm not going to offend anybody. I'm like,
Yes.
yeah, again,
And,
would you
and that
offend
I
like
love.
toilet paper? Yeah.
And that I love. And that's something I think about a lot because one thing I get criticized sometimes about speaking about this is, men are not all bad. And obviously, that I know that. And I'm really about putting the men into menstruation, and not all menstruating bodies identify as female and vice versa. This is really important that this is not about gender, that we're talking about menstruation. And so many people assigned male at birth have been left out of the conversation about bleeding and what that even means. I was talking with a friend recently, well, actually, a 27-year-old reporter here in Whistler who said he never learned anything about periods until female friends of his opened up a year ago. He didn't know. It was just never discussed. And what happens then in partnership or parenthood when there's 50% of a population who haven't been invited into the conversation? We have a real problem there. So that's cool.
Yeah, I'm just thinking as well that maybe that's something that I have taken for granted because I've probably only ever been attracted to men that do get that, and I've been quite critical. Like, if you don't know that, I do expect a lot of my partner, but of course, like, dating me, you're gonna know this stuff. It's gonna happen. He's very clued up on PMDD, but my son's only 8, and I'm thinking, you're gonna need to know this, buddy. You
Yeah.
uh, you know,
Yeah, and that's what I think a lot about is that we can't be critical because people do, it just like what we're talking about is you don't know what you don't know. And if only half of a population has access to information that impacts the whole population, like if there were no periods, there's no human life on Earth. Like that we need to be real about that. And very often what I hear is that people in hetero relationships, very often women will say that their male partners don't start to learn about or attend to the cycle unless they're having fertility issues and trying for children. And that's often happening for somebody, 30 years into life or beyond, which is that's a miss. So it's just exciting to think about. Yeah, it's just very exciting to think about a new way that crosses over old binaries that have been really harmful for a
yeah.
very long time for many reasons.
I was just so with me and learning about cyclical living, and I've got this app at the minute called Stardust, and it's about following, the
Yeah.
moon. And what I love is like there's the community aspect to it. So again, it gets rid of the whole gender and binary. It's like it's open to everyone to see what other Stardusters are doing. But the fact I can share it with my partner as well, and then he can go, "Whoa, I'm staying away from her today." Um, and it's really funny and it puts a slant on things, and you can add how you're feeling, your symptoms. And again, what I love is I can go, oh, there's so many other women feeling that way today with the moon, and I'm also, but again, I'm feeling, until last month I didn't know about the moon and my period, and I'm 44 years old. I,
Isn't that what I know? I only recently, probably within the last couple of years, Anna, and I'm making a note to myself, like download Stardust immediately. But I'm with you. I didn't know and learn until recently that it's arbitrary that we've got 12 months a year, from the Roman calendar that we largely operate under. We should have 13 months of 28 days each, which follow the moon, which follow the menstruating cycle. And that was very deliberately not done. And it oppressed and suppressed menstruating bodies for many, many years. But imagine it were 13 months and 28 days, and you could plan your life a bit more according to what's happening with your cycle. You know, when you're feeling really strong to work out, ideally, how you should be nourishing your body at different times, when you're unstoppable in your superpower, and when it's a good time for a rest day. And it might, if it were that way, 13 months of your 28-day cycles and things were regular, you might know that's the second Tuesday of every month. But we're operating under the 12-month Roman calendar, which isn't like that.
Yeah, and who put that on us, right? Is that yeah,
Exactly, exactly. And I just feel really excited to move. At first, when I learned all these things, I was quite angry, but I'm really excited to move beyond the anger to this awareness of like, whoa, whoa, why were the witches burned at the stake? And why did we get a 12-month calendar? And why is it that you and I in our 40s don't know about the connection between ovulating under the full moon and how that those are brighter times and it would be a safer time to have sex, historically, because it's bright and you could see predators approaching, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot that is so empowering to know, but also it can make you feel really angry if you're just discovering it for the first time. Like, how did we not know this? Because it was deliberately suppressed.
yeah, I am having a few WTF moments, but I also feel like,
It's
like, how did I not know this? What I'm finding, what I love is when people talk about, say, like, primitive, tribal, like you say, safety. So I'm in the minority according to Stardust. So I actually get my period as the moon starts to disappear. So on the last day of my
uh-huh,
period, the moon will disappear from the sky. And I was like, okay, so why would that happen? And it's like, so, because if you're in a tribe, you can't all be having your period at the same time because that would
right,
not be safe. You need to be like the warrior
right.
princess when everyone else is like, I'm like, oh, right. Yeah, love it. But equally, I'm like,
I'm in the presence of a warrior princess. Say more. I love
yeah.
this.
But
But yeah, when you come back to so much of this is rooted in history and biology. I'm reading an amazing book. It's so great. You said Do Less by Kate Northrup. I was really liking that too. And I've read The Cycle by Shalene Gupta talking about why it is that PMDD was suppressed and hidden for so long, why it is there's so much shame and stigma around menstruation. And it goes deep and it's an old story and it's really she's done a beautiful job. She's a journalist and did a great job writing this story. But talking with you, I just feel like, wow, I'm sad I had to wait till my mid 40s to have these conversations. Like, if only in high school I could have been like, Anna, what's going on? Okay, when do you bleed? And this is when I bleed, and what does that mean? And how fun would that have been to learn it together when we were first
yeah,
trying to figure it
it
out, you
is
know?
really sad. And it made me think that even though I would have, very girly conversations with my crew, and I would be like, oh, and we were talk about everything, but we wouldn't really talk about periods. And also, even so, I'm still best friends with my best friend from high school, and she is not, I would say, a particularly hormonal girly. She's pretty flat. She's like, I mean, she has an incredibly positive outlook. She's never particularly suffered with PMS. She didn't know what cramping felt like until she had a baby. She's never had that. So I would probably, for that reason, would never discuss that with her. So equally,
Right.
for all those years, I really, and don't know about you, Heather, but I just felt so alone. I was like, I am so
Yes.
weird. Like, why am it's only
Yeah.
me? Everyone else is killing it. Everyone else is like thriving, and I can't even do my job. Like my
Oh, Anna. Yeah.
so.
Well, I can really relate, and I just want to hold you in that all those years that you spent alone. And for anyone who's listening who's experiencing that, I've been there too, and it's very easy for the brain. My brain, I knew something was wrong, but my brain also spent a lot of time thinking, everyone else has got it together, but I don't. What's wrong with me? That's really, and as a therapist, that's a common story I hear, and that's not it. Is that message of if things are hard, try harder? That's not helpful. If things are hard, we want to dig down to the root of what's happening and to bring on more support. Because I'm with you there. And then everyone's experience is dramatically different. Like everyone experiences all of it differently, and yet there are also a lot of universal points we can come together on.
Do you have any particular huge shift moments for you on your PMDD journey that you're like, were either like mind blow or oh or
Yeah.
angry or
Yeah. So for me, when I finally figured out what it was, and that was with the support of my mom, and there was a real low point when COVID first began. I was actually just speaking with the amazing Phoebe Williams at the PMDD project, and she had a very similar story to tell. That was a very hard time for so many people, and a very hard time for anyone who is suffering already. When we made the connection and it clicked that the symptoms aligned with the cycle, which I hadn't known before, I literally hadn't known before for so many reasons, that really changed everything. And there was a lot of grief, there was a lot of anger, but I'm now in a space of joy and agency where I feel very, you can probably tell, I feel very impassioned about supporting others who are suffering too, and helping spread the word wider, to have these conversations, to help, publish and share those stories that have historically not been told or suppressed, such that people coming up after us can have a different experience. But there have been a lot of ahas since then. But it was really that one, is recognizing, oh, for 30 years, I've been trying a psychological treatment for a physiological condition. And to recognize that this is a physiological challenge connected to the cycle. And it has been, for me, it was a switch flipped when I got my first period. And it's been a challenge ever since. And I should say, I'm so delighted to hear that you're doing well and you've found treatment modalities that help you. I too have found stability and support. It took a long time to get here, but from this place of wellness, I then feel very passionate about helping others also find that solid ground to stand on. Because as you know, PMDD is like trying to climb up this slippery slope for a month's time, and then you might have, I'm on day 2 of my cycle, that maybe 5-6 days of feeling, okay, I got this. And you try and do the groceries and the laundry for the whole entire month, and then the wheels fall off again and you slide down and try to come back up. I always felt like it was two steps forward, 7 steps back, if that's relatable to anyone out there.
I always put my shifts into like 3 parts. And I think for me, it was obviously the connection, like that. Oh, and mine was so weird. So it was when I was married. And my mother-in-law at the time, really lovely lady, but really nosy, really, really like, and and she's like, Anna, have you got your period? And then she'd write it on her calendar in the kitchen, in the family kitchen. And I'd be like, what's she doing? Anyway, and then over time, she's like, you do realise that every time you feel you're really struggling, it's around this time. And I was like,
Wow.
yeah. So it was like, proper sticky beat mother-in-law. That's like, okay. But from there, I was like, okay, but how does this help me? Because there was no
Wow.
information, on PMDD at that time. I mean, it was like Google in its infancy stages. So it was, okay, I knew, but all I did for the years following that was then hate having my periods. I was like, I want to have a full hysterectomy. I want everything gone. I want to be a man, basically. I don't want this anymore.
Yeah.
Then I went through the whole chemical treatment. So the Marina coil worked somewhat for me, and I took hormones, things like that, chemicals. And again, I thought, there we are, fixed, done, da-da, I am a new woman, and I'm going to tell everyone this is all they need to do, and they will be happy too, just like me. And then I'd say probably a year after that, everything just like fell apart, and I was like, oh shit. And it was just like, what have I done wrong? I really thought I'd cracked it, and I was going to help other women. And I'm like, I can't help other women because I actually feel worse now. I feel so deflated, in that there's no hope. There's absolutely no hope. And I found that even when I had tests done and I had to go private, as many women do, because, we're not listened to. And I was told, that my levels were this and my estrogen was through the roof. And I do remember saying to them at the time, like, but why? Why is my body doing that? And they go, we don't know. We don't know. It's just luck of the draw, it's been a woman. And I remember like, really? Come on. There's got to be, I'm genuinely interested to know what it was. And it wasn't till I obviously went down the whole, actually, let's learn about being a woman. Let's embrace this cycle. Let's embrace having a period. Let's not try to stuff it down, oppress it, and look at, like say, the physiological connection. And when that was suddenly, and it made me realize in that moment that this is going to be really hard. There's going to be a lot of unpacking, a lot of healing, and it might be ongoing. But I was like, no, this is what it's about. And then it just made me go, oh my God, I wonder how many other women are suffering, not being listened to, feel there's no hope. And then I was like, oh my God, on my darkest days, how many other women feel that way and how far will they go in that darkness? And that really scared me,
Yes.
especially having a daughter.
Yes, yes. And thanks for saying that because as we know, PMDD is genetic. And the trigger warning here, of course, is that roughly 34% of people who experience PMDD experience suicidal thought. Some of them follow through on that. This is really dangerous. It often happens in the luteal phase, meaning between ovulation and menstruation. So these are really things we want to watch out for. And as a clinician, healthcare practitioner, one of the things I always ask when new clients come in is we start to talk about periods right away. We talk about sex and sexuality and periods and all the things that have been historically taboo because we need spaces to talk about this. Excuse me, but Anna, I understand that is the darkness and how hard it can be and the fear and that sense of hopelessness. All really classic symptoms of PMDD, but which we have often sort of individualized and thought this is just me. And that's really for me the excitement of the Awfully Hilarious project and our community online. Just folks to be able to say, I'm having a hard day, you're not alone. If you're having a hard day, reach out to me. Telling true stories because the hardest thing about hard things happening, I would say as a therapist, is the hard thing itself, yes, and being alone with the hard thing. That's where we would tend to experience trauma and nervous system overwhelm if we're alone in the hard thing. And so hearing you, I imagine you already are talking to your daughter and to your son and to your partner and to your podcast listeners and your followers. And that's what I'm doing too. Um, not because I would want to go around talking, but because I don't want people to suffer, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think that so much is to do with shame and how we show up. And when I think
Yeah.
about your book and the contributions, and I'm trying to think, okay, when can I look back and go, actually, I could put a spin on this? And I have to say, for me, and I know this was shame, but it was funny. So this would be back when I was married. And I would be, you can imagine, a little bit unhinged, and everything he did. Yeah, and we've all been there. Looking back, I don't know if it's to do with my PMDD actually. Um, and I would literally like, that's it, I'm done. And I would storm upstairs with like absolute anger and rage and be on the brink. And I'd shut myself in the bathroom. I'd come back down an hour later. La la la, the birds are singing, the sun is out, everything's great. And he'd go, have you got your period? And I went, yeah, fine, absolutely fine. And he went, I'm like, I'm never going to be like that again. Nah. And I don't want to talk
Yeah.
about it. It's not who I am. It's not me. No, not. And don't you dare tell anyone either. Do not tell anyone.
Yeah.
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 There's so much
Yeah.
shame. And it's like, I've got to be seen to be holding it together. Nobody can ever see me like that. No one can ever see that level of,
Yeah.
losing it.
Well, and this is, I think, really important to note when you spoke about like sort of that gift in disguise from your mother-in-law and the gift in disguise from the partner at the time is they're noticing a pattern that we as people with PMDD perhaps didn't. And people might think, oh, 30 years to diagnose, how's that possible that you didn't recognize the connection? But and this is a research question I hope gets answered at some point, but there's a really close correlation, I would guess, between neurodivergence and PMDD. And folks with ADHD, for example, can be brilliant at pattern detection. I'm brilliant at pattern detection external to me, but seeing patterns within in my own experience, I don't have the perspective to see. And very often, it just as humans, we don't. It's much easier to see a pattern happening with your daughter, for example, than in your own experience. But that's a very classic experience, what you're sharing there. And it's like, funny, not funny. Sophie Krupp at the ADHD cycle, she talks a lot about ADHD and the cycle and how this is so common that there's a very predictable cycle happening internally, but that the person impacted will not see it, but would be brilliant at detecting it with anybody else.
That is,
I can see it in my friends and in my clients and in the people around me, but I didn't see it in myself for 30 years. A, because seeing a pattern within yourself is much harder, but B, because I was deliberately ignoring my period and pretending that whole thing, like, that doesn't happen. I basically can do everything a man can do, which means not menstruating.
yeah. I mean, to the point where it's like if I had to call in sick with work, so obviously I haven't, my last, I'd say, worked for job would have been cabin crew actually. I never
Oh yeah.
I never phoned in and said I need a mental health day. I never was like, oh, I've
No.
got depression. It was always of I would say I've got tummy flu or something.
Right.
Yeah, I was that embarrassed and shameful
Right.
about it.
Right. And for those listening who don't know about PMDD, like symptoms are so severe that, like in talking to Sophie Krupp at the ADHD cycle, we could consider that PMDD could be referred to as what you would call a dynamic disability, in that some days you're totally yourself and able to perform any functions of parenting, work, etc. And then other days you can't brush your teeth. Like there are days where I can't seem to make breakfast. And that can happen with different conditions also. But with PMDD, there's that cyclical fluctuation to it. And how interesting, if we were talking about this today and it were known that you have PMDD, you might get, there are some places that allow and support work leave around that. But whereas, at that time in cabin crew, you'd kind of have to lie and say, I've got some sort of a bug. But it might happen every month.
I am as part of my journey, and I set up the PMDD awareness campaign in the UK, and I tried to go to it was like a court jurisdiction to try and make a point that we should be able to maybe get some sort of incapacity benefit or
Thank
with a
you.
diagnosis, something like that. And I went and I've done a TikTok on it, and you can imagine. So the the magistrate, the judge, she was probably in her 50s. She was switched on. She was probably menopausal, I'd say. So she was interested in what I had to say. But the doctor, this is crazy, right? So the doctor they had, the medical professional to sit there and be for the DWP, is in to be against me and what I was trying to ask for. He said to me, before I presented my case, he said, I've never heard about PMDD and I don't know much about women's conditions, but I have been married.
Oh, please.
That's what,
That's obviously.
and I actually went, well, thanks, Derek. Shall I go now? I just couldn't believe it. And then they had to
No.
score me on certain things. But the problem is, so in the UK, unless you have this every week or day per day, it doesn't count. And I could say, look, I could work a fire week and I could knock out 60 hours and be amazing. And then I could
Yes.
be down for the next two, and it's
Wow.
so that's the problem
And
I've
this
got.
is where I'm so excited and happy to hear about your advocacy work, and then how shocking and appalling that the doctor chosen to fight the other side doesn't know about premenstrual dysphoric disorder, isn't an expert on women's health. That's entirely inappropriate. And I'm sorry you went through it, and I'm glad you showed up to that. I'm really glad you showed up to that. And that's, I think, what we have to keep showing up. And it's hard not to get disillusioned or angry, but I see the tide turning, and especially with the attention being paid to perimenopause and menopause these days. I think the tide is starting to turn around. Like women won't be silent any longer.
Well,
Um,
yeah, and the fact we're having this conversation, absolutely.
mhm.
I don't think even this would
Yeah.
have occurred a few years ago. I wanted to ask you, Heather, and you mentioned it then, and to do with neurodiversity and the link there. This has been brought up quite a few times on her shift, and I have to say it's not something that I know about or can even relate to. And one of the things that has perhaps made me feel a little bit alone sometimes in this world, that when I've done any sort of, I don't know, questions, or I don't like labels, but I am so beige and neurotypical that I don't fit into any of these superpower modes um, at all. And my daughter's even said to me, she said, "You're a dying breed, Mum." With all superpowers, and I'm like, God, I'm so boring. I've got nothing like going for me like that at all. And and therefore, I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on that link and how perhaps it could be used as a positive, in the
Yeah.
PMDD.
Yeah, and I'm just so glad to hear you say that, because this is where it's important to say that not all people with PMDD have ADHD, and we need to study more. I have no expertise in that area. Again, Sophie Krupp with the ADHD cycle is talking about that a lot. The International Association for Premenstrual Disorders is getting a lot of questions around the links between neurodivergence and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Also links between trauma and trauma before first menses and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. There's a lot of thought around there, but a lot of research that has to happen. And I'm giggling about, no superpowers. I'm just neurotypical. It's a superpower to be neurotypical. It's so helpful. And there are superpowers and genius in terms of however we may be. I often frame this conversation around some of the theoretical work around the ADHD brain as being the hunter brain, the more neurotypical brain as being the farmer brain. So the hunter farmer brain, and at any given time in a population, there would be the hunters and the farmers. And if we're talking, thousands of years ago, primitive needs, hunters have, great peripheral vision, can react very quickly to external stimuli, move very quickly for short periods of time, bring home meat to the community, and be revered for that. And then the others who might remember where the healing plants are, the healing herbs are. There's different skill sets, all of which are needed. But the issue today is the brains privileged are the neurotypical brains, the neurodivergent brains, the hunter brain. And I'm really specifically here, I'm not talking about autism. I'm really specifically here talking about ADHD. This is not privileged in society today. So I think when we talk about PMDD, there are a lot of elements at play, but one of the commonalities is that every single person with PMDD holds at least one oppressed identity, and that is being a menstruating person. So at least one. And then when we talk about intersectionality and other layers of oppression, things get more and more and more complex. And my guess is that PMDD would be more and more prevalent and more likely because we have elements of trauma that play into it. Neurodivergence, I believe, plays into it. But again, the research still, we're operating with not enough data points at the moment. So again, not my area of expertise. What I speak of is just sort of what I see and what I see repeatedly. And I just think there's nothing beige about being neurotypical. And that we all have our own superpower and our own genius. And I love that you say that because anyone with a cycle can have PMDD.
Absolutely.
Many people with a cycle don't have PMDD. We know it's roughly, now we think it's 1 in 20. I think it's probably much higher. I would guess the stats are much higher in communities of color. I would guess the stats are much higher in trans communities and communities where there has been more trauma. So again, there's just a lot of missing data.
I was just thinking there about, I don't know what my superpower is yet, but in terms of the neurotypical is, I'd say, well, I really do. It's been put on me how to behave in society and for the oppression that's been put on me. And this is what we do and this is what we say. And I get it and it's done. And I don't tend to read situations or the room wrong. And I don't tend to have to, I'm not here, there, everywhere. Like, I'm very, like I said, to me, it's quite beige. It's like, that's what's happening. This is what's going on in my head. And I behave a certain way. But then that leads to that feeling of I'm very much alone. I'm the only person that's going through this. Because if I saw someone who perhaps was more themselves going, I'm not, I don't fit into what society's oppressed me to. I don't know, acting maybe a bit skittish. I'm having a Hell Week episode, but publicly, something that I would never dare do because that was just not how I was brought up. I'm thinking, society's not helping this at all, is it? And and I'm feeding into that.
Yeah, and I can really relate to that. I imagine many of your listeners can, of being sort of the good girl, like following the rules, like the conditioning that says, this is the way to behave, and then we follow those rules. Unfortunately, because of the context and the cultures that we've grown up in, a lot of that conditioning ends up being internalized capitalism, internalized patriarchy, and then we have internalized these beliefs that keep us from being free. So, and then we live it externally in a culture which we are challenging this through conversations like this, but tells us to behave in certain ways. And then I think it's interesting and relevant that I'm in Canada, you're in the UK. My ancestry is by way of Scotland and England. There was a strong story historically, culturally, my family around, and not my immediate family by any means. I was never told this, but I picked up somewhere along the way, suffer in silence. Like, you don't go around talking about your problems. You just don't do that. And that maybe there's an advantage to that, but a real disadvantage is if we don't talk about something that's causing a real problem, it might just continue to run that problem in the background continually and not get addressed, and lead to that feeling that you spoke of being isolated and alone. And in the experience of the writers in this story, I was so inspired by their courage. Every single one of them, they did this for free. Many of them wrote for the first time ever, and they said, I'm going to tell my story. I'm really scared. Most of them said it's the first time I'm ever writing this or telling this. I'm doing it in the hopes that there's someone out there who needs to hear it. If it can help one person, it is all worth it. And that's really what this project is all about. And what I'm inspired by in your work with Her Shift and your podcast is just, yeah, letting folks know that if something feels wrong, it's probably wrong. If something hurts, you don't have to go off into a corner to lick your wounds. Like, how would it be to have a hug?
Absolutely. I just think it's now how I view it. So it's like, yes, I've definitely, this window of my symptoms has collided with ovulation.
Mm-hmm.
And now I go, okay, what's my body telling me? What's it trying to protect me from? What story is going on in there that's been internalized? If you could think about, I think a lot of women might feel like this, maybe it's like the UK. So my background is very, that stiff upper British lip. When you think about the
Yes.
Crown, as in do not
Yes.
complain, do not explain, that is, yeah, that would have been
Yes.
said to me, and that is what I carry. And I think to me that I won't say it causes PMDD, but I definitely think it doesn't help it, and I definitely think it's the antichrist of the healing. So
I'm really with you. And, it just sort of plants I have all these seeds of curiosity in talking with you. And I wonder about, what about in Latin cultures where there's more communication, things are more expressive, perhaps. I wonder about the prevalence of PMDD cross culture in different cultures where different stories are told. And this is something I see a lot, of course, in my therapeutic practice. Is it's always so important and interesting to understand the context that someone comes from. And the commonality right now, of course, dominant culture on the planet right now is like colonized patriarchal white supremacy. And that's something that a lot of people are working really hard to dismantle and find alternate stories. But there is that common experience. But then what's the difference of if you grew up in Germany, if you grew up in the Sudan, if you grew up in Peru, if you grew up in Canada? I'm really curious about that. And those are, I think, really important areas of study that I hope that get explored sometime soon.
I'm really curious now, Heather, as well, because I have to say I hadn't even gone that far in my head, but thinking, yeah, absolutely, it would make such a difference, surely, and it'd be so interesting. And I mean, we're so down on data, though, aren't we? I mean, not just with it in women's health in general. Whenever I have a little vent about the patriarchy, it's always like, if this was a man, we would be, we would have the data, wouldn't we? But yeah, I'm already thinking about, like you said, people that are just. I'm just thinking, so from being cabin crew, and obviously I travelled there and like the cultures, and now I'm thinking about those that seemed happier, more content, more expressive, had less materially, but you know, is PMDD even a thing? Yeah.
Well, and isn't it interesting, both of us, right, in positions where we're thinking and talking about PMDD a lot. I'm working in this field. You've got a podcast, you're speaking about this, that we don't know. There are more questions than answers. And this is where I hope, I'm doing my work as a writer and therapist. You're doing your beautiful work as an advocate, podcaster, a parent, all the other things you're doing in your life. My hope is that by talking about this, some researchers are listening and might also be curious about the questions of like cross-cultural presentation and the connection between neurodivergence and PMDD. I'm not a researcher. I just have questions. But I actually feel quite excited and hopeful that we're living in a time where people are paying attention. Oh, hello, I've got a friend joining me now.
So
That's Changa.
there you go.
My tiny tiger
Uh,
is here for the visit.
so yeah,
Um,
we just had a
but that's
little
one thing. Anyone
visitor.
listening, if you got PMDD, a pet is one of the most supportive, helpful things, not to mention nervous system co-regulation, but having another little being to unconditionally love and care for. So just
Yeah.
there's my message for adopting cats if you're in a position to do so.
No.
I actually wrote a blog post about that for my practice because, yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm a big believer in that and the connection. And yeah, we haven't got a pet in the house at the minute, and I think, I'm
a,
tempted. Yeah.
a plant, any sort of yeah, we're biophilic in nature as humans. We are nature. So any living being, of course, that in particular with PMDD that requires very little care, but that you can provide support and have reciprocal relationship. That's my soapbox. I'll get off of that.
No, no, God, there's so many places you could take this conversation, isn't there?
Yeah.
I'm gonna say before we go, tell me just about the book, as in, what do you want people to take from it? How do you think it will help people, and where they can get it?
Yeah, thanks so much. And Anna, thanks so much for the time. And the listeners who've stuck with us, thank you. It's just so awesome to have you here. Awfully Hilarious has a presence, a website, awfullyhilarious.com, Instagram at Awfully Hilarious, Facebook at Awfully Hilarious. The books are everywhere that you get books. If you want a huge favor to me would be if you request them in your libraries or drop them off in little free libraries, because we want these messages out as wide as possible. And if you're suffering or know someone who's suffering, like maybe you get this for a daughter, a sister, a friend. There are actually 3 books in this series. The first is about dating disasters. The second one about periods, which we're really focused on today. And the third is coming out shortly, and that's the one about sex, sexuality, intimacy, desire, pleasure. I think, Anna, you and I should collab on one awfully hilarious cabin crew moments. I think there's a lot we could go for there with awfully hilarious in flight. Maybe we could team up with my friend I am
Oh,
Mr.
I'm here for
Fabulous.
it. Oh,
Um, but yeah, if join in the conversation with us in any way. If you want to wear my t-shirts like mine and start, I do this as a conversation prompt. Those playfully provocative, loving, funny conversations that we can have. Like that woman, she's so amazing. My new favorite comedian from the UK, Victoria Eames, last week gets out and she's like, you know what you got to do? Feeling low, feeling anxious, feeling good. Get out there, get your minge on a tree, and the thing went viral.
Oh, a bit
Highly
of
recommend as a
grounding.
nature-based therapist. Yeah, exactly. Well, new word for me, being in Canada. Never heard of minge, but I've got one. I want to use it in this way. As a nature-based therapist, I say, ask the tree for consent and go for it if it feels right for all parties. I mean, she did recommend gusseted pants, just for protection.
So so lefty as well, asking the tree for consent. Like,
Well, I
right, it's a
mean, you
living,
better.
breathing
All
thing.
consenting parties. But yeah, you can get the books anywhere you get books, and we would just be so delighted to see them in libraries so that people would have access to stories like this.
It's just something you want to have everywhere, isn't it? Like coffee table, at the doctor's surgery. So what I'll do is I will request one at our local library. And also what I have
Thank you.
in the show notes, I have something called, I call it the shift list, and it's got my 10 favorite self-development books on there. And what I'll do, Heather, is I will add it to that with the links. So it's
Oh,
just a list about,
that means that means so much to me and to all these writers who are writing for the first time to just try and help folks. And I love that you call it the shift list. That's very clever.
yes, or,
Here's to shift.
well, I thought, to take on words and get your shift together. Yeah. So
Heck yeah.
yeah, I will. And I'm a big fan of Audible. Is there an audio version of the?
Coming soon, probably within the next month. And you know what's awesome? I'm so glad you asked. This is really edgy and fun what we've done, but it's recorded in the voices of the contributors. So it starts off with 11-year-old Yale, who identifies as neurodivergent, dyslexic, was really afraid to read out loud. She nailed it. So you'll get to hear the stories in the voices of the contributors. So I can't wait for that. I'm getting it out there as soon as possible. The last one's being recorded this week, so stay tuned.
Please do, because I have to say, so I've not read a physical book in years. I am such a fan of audio. I really, really am. So
Yes.
please, yeah, if we can do that. And like I said, I will put it on the shift list, and then it will be there, and we can get the message out.
Thanks, Anna. So good to be here with you. I hope you have a really beautiful week going forward, and I'm just wildly grateful for the work you're doing. It matters.
Well, Heather, I have loved this conversation, and we're going to have to do this again because it's like such
Well, we've got a book to write, awfully hilarious in flight. Let me know when you're next free.
absolutely we will do that. But yes, I in the meantime, I'm gonna say goodbye to everyone, and yeah, God, what a great conversation. How can the people get in touch with you, Heather? Actually, just before we go, what platform do
Yeah,
you
of course. My website is heatherhendrie.com. My therapy practice is truenaturewilderness.therapy.com. We provide therapy services across Canada. And then Awfully Hilarious has its own website too. So, and on any of those, you can find my email, direct messages, et cetera, et cetera. I'd love to hear from you and support you how we can.
absolutely amazing. Thank you so, so much, Heather. And I will, yeah, say goodbye, and we will see you very soon, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.